formation of the Grange and basic principles, and the next meeting will be what the Grange has done in the 150 years. Here we are today. So if we're just going to start by reading this first page, more or less a summary. The Grange came into being in 1867 because of the vision of Albert Hudson Kelly, a Minnesota farmer and activist. He had long held that farmers, because of their independent and scattered nature, needed a national organization which would represent them as unions were beginning to do for industrial workers. Farmers were at the mercy of merchants for both needed farm supplies and for marketing their crops. Railroads and warehouse companies were taking advantage of farmers as well. I want us to just stop there for a minute. This was 1867. What had just completed? The Civil War had just completed. The South was in devastation, and that included, of course, included the farmers. Their lands were destroyed. A lot of the farmers were killed, leaving their farms in uproar. It was complete devastation. And at the same time, the railroads were monopolizing the farmers. They were taking advantage of how the farmers needed to get their produce to markets and everything by the railroads. And so they were taxing them highly because they knew the farmers needed to get their supplies. And so that's why Albert Kelly and some of his friends knew that an organization was needed. I just want to read you a quote here, too, from another source. This is from the book called The Grange. An agricultural organization included a great part of the farmers of the nation. Would be able to demand fairer treatment from the railway corporations and to enforce it with the help of the state. It could use its immense influence to secure more favorable legislation on such matters as the tariff, currency, and taxation. By means of a widespread local organization, it could gather and disseminate useful information concerning the crops and the markets, and in general, it could foster a beneficent spirit of cooperation and mutual assistance among its members. In this way alone can a satisfactory explanation be found for the widespread and movement for our organization, which appeared among the farmers in the decades of the 60s and 70s. So continuing on the summary, Kelly and some of his friends organized the National Grange, officially known as the Order of Patrons of Husbandry, as a fraternal group similar to the Masonic Lodge. The early leaders were responsible for promoting cooperatives, which had the potential of helping farmers economically. Effecting lobbying efforts were undertaken early, and this activity remains a bulwark of Grange service to rural America. Education of rural residents was championed by the early Grange, and due to Grange agitation, dramatic improvements were made in rural schools. The birth of the Extension Service, rural free delivery, and the farm credit system were largely due to Grange lobbying. The Grange at all levels is strictly nonpartisan and does not endorse candidates for public office nor contribute to their campaigns. I don't know how many of you remember reading when you had United States history in school about the so-called Granger movement, or Granger laws. These were laws that were initiated by the Grange, again, against the monopolies of the railroads and to help the farmers. So you remember that when you learned about the Granger movement. At the national level, the Grange actively lobbies for causes which are in accord with organizational policy. All policy within the Grange originates at the local level. That's when we read our resolutions, which go on to the state Grange, go on to Pomona Grange, go on to the state Grange. It remains as one of America's best examples of democratic grassroots activism. The primary legislative objective of the Grange is to represent the views of rural residents and the agricultural community. These issues include transportation, farm programs, rural economic development, education, health and safety concerns, and many others. Each year, the policies are summarized and published in booklet form. Again, these policies come from resolutions. You and I and other local members start in their own subordinate ranges and then go up to National Grange. Early in its history, Grange leaders realized that social interaction was especially important to rural residents. For nearly 130 years, Grange halls have existed as community centers where residents gather for educational events, dances, potlucks, town meetings, political rallies, and other meetings. I guess this was written quite a while ago because it's 150 years. Junior Grange 4-H, FFA, scouting, and campfire groups have thrived because of Grange involvement, and each year tens of thousands of Grange members participate in numerous community service projects. A wide variety of social, leadership, and educational opportunities for members of all ages have been made available throughout the organization's long history. Members not only receive personal satisfaction from accomplishing something they enjoy, but they share in the greater reward of being an active part of an organized effort to bring people together for good times, constructive activities, and honest, hard-working community building. And this is where you can get the books, some of the books about the Grange. And I just want to bring to your attention the Grange motto: in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, and in all things charity. Okay, continuing on the Grange founders. You know the Grange emblem has how many sides? The Grange emblem? There are 7 sides. Each side, if you see a Grange emblem which has the name of all the 7 founders. Some of them that are predominantly have the 7 founders. And the number 1 founder, who is called the founding father, is Oliver Hudson Kelley. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts. He was called a propagandist and a dreamer. Goes on to tell a lot about him. Under his character, he was an engine with too much steam on all the time. So he was on the go. That's why they called him a propagandist. And that's why he was the one that went to the south to see what was going on down there and to see the basic why they needed a national organization down there, especially. He was the founding father. He went out into the world to tell everybody about the Grange. And he was the first secretary of the National Grange. And some interesting things, you can read for yourself some of the facts, but he owned and operated the first reaping machine in Minnesota. He built the first frame barn in Minnesota. That's where the Kelley Farm is. I know you've heard it through the Grange meetings and activities about the Kelley Farm. It's in Elk River, Minnesota. Jack and I have been there, and I know several others have been there. It's a very nice farm. This is where, although he was born in Boston, Massachusetts, he went into farming in Minnesota. And it seems quite interesting that he was honored with a $100 a month pension by the National Grange in 1905. They put him on pension. Now, the Grange was founded in 1867. So this is, 38 years later after the Grange was founded, he was given $100 a month. And in 1905, $100 a month was a lot of money, considering what $100 is today. And he was the last of the 7 founders to pass away. Okay, continuing on the next page is William Saunders. William Saunders' birthplace is very important. We're going to find out a little bit later. He was born in St. Andrews, Scotland. He was from Scotland. He is known as an organizer. Under the Grange rolls, he suggested the name Grange for the meeting place and patrons of husbandry for the order. He wrote the preamble of the National Grange Constitution, and he was the first master. Although you might think that Oliver Kelley may have been the first master because he was known as the founding father, he was not. William Saunders was the first master of the National Grange. And then you can read a little bit on further about William Saunders. Over to Aaron Borsch on the next page. Aaron was a man of God. He was very religious. He was the first chaplain of the National Grange. Under the Grange rolls, he furnished all the prayers for the lower degrees and helped write those degrees. He gathered the first group of the Grange songs. But speaking about the religious aspect of the degrees, if you were to go through the degree work in the manual, you could pick up many, many Bible verses. Although the Grange is based a lot on Roman and Greek mythology, there are a lot of Bible verses. For instance, the master's closing charge that he has, feeding the hungry, helping the fatherless and the widows, and keeping ourselves unspotted from the world. That is a biblical quote. In the installation charge, at the end of the installation, the installing officer says how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It's like the ointment upon the beard that ran down to the skirts of the garment. Again, that's a biblical quote, and there are many, many more in all the degree work and in the Grange ritual itself. William Ireland, it has that he was a man of God, but added to that, he was a parliamentarian and a journalist. He was the first treasurer of the National Grange. He constructed the original Constitution and bylaws of the Grange and prepared the journals of proceedings. So he was the first treasurer.
These are Masons, too.
Oh, a lot of them were Masons. A lot of them were Masons. In fact, it is known, Jack has mentioned this many times, but when Oliver Hudson Kelly went to the South, what got him into a lot of the in contact with a lot of the farms and a lot of the situations going into the South was that he was known as a Mason and he had a Masonic ring to make himself known. And so the Masons down there, of course, took him right in and helped him in his effort. Francis McDowell was the financier of the Grange. He took over the financial affairs of the Grange, even though he wasn't the first treasurer. He invested Grange funds, and he was the first high priest of Demeter in the National Grange. He served as national treasurer, though, for nearly 21 years, although he was not the original treasurer. He was the last of the group to join the 7 founders. Okay, then we go down to John Thompson. John Thompson, another New Englander, born in Littleton, New Hampshire. He was a ritualist, a brilliant writer, a talented originator. And he was the first lecturer of the National Grange. Again, you see on the fun facts, high degree Mason. So a lot of them had the Masonic background. That's why a lot of the ritual between the Grange and the Masonic fraternity is quite similar. John Trimble was known as a critic and advisor. His character,
Nothing to win-win.
right? Another new. Well, it says birth date. It says this is.
New Hampshire.
Yeah, but it says birth date New Jersey. That's why I don't understand this information. So I'd have to look further into that. But there's an error there. There is also an error down under his Grange rolls because he was not the first treasurer. He was the 3rd secretary. The first treasurer was William Ireland, as we already wrote. So that's an error when they compiled this information too. So he was the 3rd secretary. So if you have a pen, if you want to cross that out, just so you have no errors there. Okay, so that takes care of the 7 founders. You're not going to do this Kelly word search now, because you have a lot to get to, but you can take it home and do it. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on why it was called the Grange. And as I said, William Saunders was the first master of the National Grange, was born in Scotland. I told you that would have something to do later on. In connection with the naming of the new farm fraternity, as the 7 founders earnestly discussed it during the first year of its planning, it is interesting to note some of the suggested names that were offered, only to be rejected one by one. These are some of the names that were suggested instead of the Grange. Independent farmers, lords of the soil, knights of the plow, brethren of the vine and companions of labor. For the local units, some of the names suggested were vineyards, gardens, groves, fields, farms, beehives. So there was a lot of suggestions. After everything else had been rejected, the order of patrons of husbandry was finally agreed upon, and local units were to be called Granges. Further study of the word Grange indicates the appropriateness of its selection. The word is found in several languages. Okay. Much has been written about the reasons for the selection of the name Grange, and some differences of opinion about the matter have always existed. In history, Kelly states that he took the name from a local novel published at the time. Nevertheless, the belief has always prevailed that it was in part traceable to the landed estates of Old England, with which Saunders was so thoroughly familiar. At least it coincided with his knowledge, and so its adoption readily furthered. And the names of the officers, the master, the overseer, they go along with the Old English estate over in England, in Scotland area of the estates. He's the master of the estate. He was the ruler of the state, overseer. He was the head one, in other words, the overseer. He was the one that kind of had oversaw everything, but was always had to report to the worthy master. So this is how the names of the various officers came about. Now the first meetings, the first Grange that was set up was a tryout Grange. They just wanted to try out. It was formed in Potomac Grange No. 1 in Washington, D.C. It was the tryout Grange. And it was organized on January 8, 1868. This is after the original meetings that the 7 founders have had. They're meeting on December 4th, with a ritual tentatively outlined and a constitution partially framed. A meeting of the founders was held in William Saunders' office, again in Washington, D.C., December 4th, 1867, since recognized as the birthday of the Grange. And then and there they constituted themselves the National Grange, patrons of husbandry, and elected the officers. So that was their first meeting when they elected the officers on December 4th, 1867. So that was considered the birth date of the Grange.
So it wasn't in the South, like you said, it was in Washington.
Right, no, but he wanted to, Kelly went to the South to find out what was needed, what kind of an organization was needed to help the farmers. So even though the greatest devastation and the most need was in the South, the need was needed all over the country. And since these 7 founders basically had their offices in Washington, D.C., that's why it was, the first Grange was tried out in Washington, D.C. Again, that was Potomac Grange No. 1 in January 8, 1868. But that was just the tryout Grange. And after that, in fact, I read up a little bit on the history of Potomac Grange. It did go out of existence for a while. And it went back and forth. It went out of existence for 2 or 3 times. But it is that and a very active Grange today in Washington, D.C. You find a lot of the National Grange offices belong to Potomac Grange No. 1. Then the first real Grange, not a tryout Grange, the first genuine Grange was organized by Oliver Hudson Kelly in April of 1868, Fredonia Grange, #1 in New York State. And Fredonia Grange is still existing and an active grange today. So if anyone is in that area of New York State, would like to go look up Fredonia Grange. That's the first genuine grange, and it was organized by Oliver Kelly himself. The first grange in New England was Green Mountain Grange #1 in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. Again, organized by Oliver Hudson Kelly himself. And that was organized on July 4, 1871. This grange is no longer in existence, sad to say. So that's a little bit of background on
When was the first one created in Rhode Island?
Narragansett Grange #1 was the first one in Rhode Island. Okay, and they go up in order. It's like Rumford #52. We were the 52nd grange formed in Rhode Island. That's how we got the number of our granges. Roger Williams Grange, which combined with us, consolidated with us, they were 19. Roger Williams #19. They were a lot older than Rumford Grange. There was only a total of 56 granges. Gatsby Grange #56. That was the highest number that we had in the state of Rhode Island. The next pages in here are a little bit background on Kelly himself. If it be true that a dreamer has been responsible for most of the progressive movements in human history, then it can be truly be said that the dreamer of Oliver Hudson Kelly played a large part in the great farm fraternity that has so richly blessed the rural life of America under the name of patrons of husbandry, then known as the Grange. Like I said, down a little bit, it tells more about how he had the farm in Minnesota. He built the first grain barn. He was very active in the Masonic fraternity, very active in politics. It talks about his marriage. His first wife passed away, and then his second wife, he and his second wife had quite a few children. Mrs. Kelly, his second wife, was Pomona in the National Grange. This is on the back page now. And he was selected by Andrew Johnson to survey agricultural conditions in the southern states following the Civil War. And he had a niece, in fact I think it was really his wife's niece, whose name was Carolyn Hall. And she was very active in putting her voice into what she thought the Grange should be. And it was because of her, as you can see, Kelly says, on reaching Washington April 21st, I made a short stop and spent the afternoon on the 22nd with Dr. Trimble. On leaving Washington, went first to Boston, where I gave Miss Hall my views of the association in their crude state, to which she suggested that we give ladies full membership. This feature originated with her. Back in that time, there was no such thing as women belonging to fraternal organizations. The Masonic fraternity was going on, but again, strictly men. But to have women in an organization where they had as much vote as men was unseen of until the Grange came along back then. So Caroline Hall has been come to be known now as the 8th founder of the Grange. Even though there are 7 basic founders, I believe that even National passed a resolution commemorating Caroline Hall as the 8th founder of the Grange because she had such a, a really tremendous say in what was going on in Grange as far as the women were concerned. That is for sure.
So this song was in Minnesota. So when was the first Grange in Minnesota?
I really would have to look into that. I don't know, Erica.
Because that's where his farm was, and that's where he started.
Right,
Oh.
but they were not the first Granges in the country, like I said. Okay, the first Grange was Potomac and then Freetonia number 1. Okay, now a little bit of background. Eric, you want to pass
Okay.
one of these out to everyone, please? Just a little background on the degrees of the Grange. And this will be the last thing that we're going to go over this evening, and then we'll continue with the next meeting. Of course, since the Grange had a basis in agriculture, the first degree symbolizes spring. And the members taking the first degree are called laborers and maids. And the first degree symbol is faith. Okay, guys, this is the 4 degrees. Good faith, faith in God. Nurtures hope. See, 2nd degree. Hope. Dispenses charity. 3rd degree. Noted for fidelity. See the 4th degree. So when a member is becoming a member, taking the 4 degrees, they're learning this, all this stuff in the degree work itself. The first degree, again, all the different degrees are different seasons here. The first degree is spring, the 2nd degree is summer, the 3rd degree is fall, and the 4th degree is winter. The first degree, again, talking about our aging process of individuals. The first degree is childhood. Then we go into youth in the 2nd degree. The 3rd degree, adulthood, and the 4th degree, old age. Now, the implement. The implement is the degree work. If you have never seen what's in this case, that they open up every meeting and close every meeting, these are the implements of the degree. So the first degree is the axe, the plow, the harrow, and the spade. The 2nd degree, the hoe, and the pruning knife. These are all implements that would have been used by the farmers during this particular season. In the first degree, they would be using the axe, the plow. They would be digging up their ground in order to plant the seed. In the 2nd degree, the hoe and the pruning knife. That's what they would need in the summertime to prune all their plants, their vegetation. In the 3rd degree is, of course, the harvesters and gleaners. This is when we glean all the crops, the harvest. This is when we're taking all the harvest. This is the sickle. We use sickles to cut down the crop. And in the 4th degree is the ag. Okay, the 4th degree is fidelity. And fidelity, we think fidelity is associated with the class, but really fidelity is loyalty, devotion. And that's what we have, loyalty and devotion, not only to our country, but to our organization and to God. And the 5th degree, 7th degree of all of these is the degree of Flora. When you take the 6th degree, you are joining the state Grange. And the 7th degree is the degree of Ceres or the degree of Demeter, which is the highest degree. I don't know if there's any other questions that I can possibly answer, not deep like Eric gave me, because I can't answer that. But I hope I've given you a little bit of explanation about the background of the Grange. And I hope you all have a song book. I want to close tonight. Yes?
So, Freetonia Grange is in the great growing area of New York, up in that section of where
Welch's grape juice
Oh.
and
Is it near the Finger Lakes area?
near the Finger Lakes area. Honey, a question from Lisa.
When we wanted international, and they did that about the ritual, when did that come into effect?
What do you mean, when this was into effect, when the
Yeah,
Grange
then
ritual?
we went and learned about with the initials, and I found it very interesting. I can't think of the name of it.
Code reading.
Yes.
Code
When
reading.
did that come into effect?
Wait, that took quite a while longer afterwards, I believe.
Oh,
Okay, because that was a book that was established at a later date, so it would make it easier for the master of the Grange to do the secret work of the degree.
I found that very interesting.
Yes.
When we were up
So
there.
it was just an assistance for the master, so it would find it easier, because it's just the first letter of each word that's in the code book. So it would be an guideline. The beautiful truths that are taught in the Grange. From household and farmstead, bit symbols they drew, from nature's abundance, apt lessons and true. From Bible, selected the truths from above, and fashioned with ardor and brotherly love. The beautiful ritual we use in the Grange. Now let's try to sing it. All praise to the man who our order conceived, who labored until his bravery was achieved. While let we give to the excellent day of those who assisted in having portrayed the beautiful lessons we've heard in the Grange. Fourth verse. From household and farmstead, been simple they drew, from nature's abundance and lessons and true. From Bible selected the truths from above, and fashioned with honor and brotherly love, the beautiful ritual we use in the Grange.